Hi everybody, welcome to TIA Now. I'm Clarence Reynolds. In a perfect world, the federal government would be able to maximize the secure use of cloud computing, modernize government-hosted applications, and securely maintain legacy systems, but we're not there yet. Federal agencies are still working to meet the objectives of critical modernization initiatives, which were set forth in the report to the President on IT modernization. And John Weiler is Executive Director of the IT Acquisition Advisory Council. And Tony Scott is Senior Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Advisor at Squire Patton Boggs and the former federal CIO. And they both join us with insights. Welcome to you both.
Well, thank you for having us today.
Absolutely.
Great to be here.
John, I want to start with you first. What are the key messages in that report to the President on modernization that was submitted in 2017?
The report does an excellent job of laying out the current state in federal IT and what the national security threat by having legacy systems that have been around since the 70s and 80s that haven't been updated, that haven't been modernized, and represent not only a huge cost, but also a vulnerability that could be a threat profile for our enemies. And we also have to look at the government. I mean, all the services that the government provides to its nation and its people and healthcare. If you have old stuff, it's not giving a good service. So this was an attempt, and I think it's one of the best since Clinger-Cohen Act has signed, is to really create a forcing function and a roadmap for agencies to get with commercial innovations, commercial best practices. Because government's not driving this boat anymore. They're only 2% of the global IT market.
And you were both part of a group that authored recommendations to implementation for this modernization. What were some of the key points in those recommendations?
Well, I think the first set of recommendations have to do with building on what's already known. So there's a number of great commercial best practices that we've seen adopted in the private sector that it's important for government to take advantage of. As John mentioned, one of them is use commercial software. I'm fond of saying, don't build any software you don't have to. And the legacy of government information systems is we custom code from the beginning the entire solution on whatever current technology happens to be in place at that point in time. We did that in the 1970s, we did that in the 1980s, did that in the 1990s, we did it again in 2000, and so on. And unfortunately, we're still doing the same thing. And while it may look like a smart thing to go build a bunch of custom code on today's popular platform, the reality is there's going to be tomorrow's popular platform. And if you take advantage of commercial software, the advantage that you get is you're not paying for the redevelopment of that custom code by yourself every time over and over and over and over again.
You're also able to keep up.
Yeah, it's important for, because the commercial software vendors understand their market, they work with all of their end users, and they adapt their technology over time. And so that's one best practice. Another is use shared services broadly. And it's something the government in the past has tried to do, but they did it with a all singing, all dancing shared service. They went around and said to everybody, what are your requirements, what are your requirements, what are your requirements, and what are your requirements, and then tried to satisfy all those needs. And it turns out that a better approach is to do the 80% of things that are common, that everybody needs, and then let everybody build on top of that with an API their own unique niche custom requirements. Favorite example of mine is case management. There's case management applications.
Excellent one.
In every agency, and they're all custom built from the ground up. And they do 80% of the same thing all the time. So why don't we have a cloud-based cloud service that does the 80% that everybody
COTS.
can use?
Yes.
Yeah.
COTS, not a custom-built one, please,
Yeah.
again.
Yep. And then let every agency do the thing that they want. So those are some examples. I think John and I talk a lot about procurement reform. You might want to talk about that a little bit because it's another big area. It's not just what you buy, but it's how you buy.
That's a good segue, Tony. Thank you. See, if you look at this IT modernization report, and Executive Order 13800, it's intended to complement the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act, otherwise known as FITARA. And FITARA, began to really attack the root causes, where even President Obama said fundamentally federal IT procurement is broken when looking at the healthcare automation project that was all over the news, front page of the Washington Post, actually. So we have been buying the same way in government going back to the 60s and 70s, where the buying processes were focused on buildings and weapon systems. So we've tried to adapt those industrial age processes to the digital age, and they don't work. In DoD, the average acquisition time frame is 84 months. The average success rate is 16%.
You mean 84% are failing once they're implemented?
Fail to deliver measurable value. Really? The civilian agency is a little bit better, but DoD is so large, and when you look at Big Bang always fails, they're all Big Bang. They're multi-billion-dollar investments, and they do what, as Tony suggested they don't do, is aggregate every single possible requirement, because it's going to be 8 years, and if you don't have your requirement, you're never going to get it. And it just adds to the likelihood of high risk, high failure rates, over-specification, and the inability to buy a commercial solution, because you begin this waterfall process that you're assuming you're unique, and you really don't look outside of your borders. You don't look outside of government IT for the innovation, the practice, the understanding, and the contractors are happy to custom build what you could have bought, because you're saying that's what I'm incentivizing. Right. So the contracting community will change if the government changes how it incentivizes, how it buys it now outcomes, and gets away from this waterfall process that takes 84 months.
So I know it's only been 1 year, but where are we on advancing any of the initiatives in the report?
Well, I think, and I'll speak to the civilian side, maybe John can talk to the DoD side, but on the civilian side, there's been a couple of really good developments this year. We had the passage of the Modernizing Government Technology Act, which provides for funds, both central funds and in the agency funds, in the form of what are called working capital accounts or funds, which essentially can be no-year money for those that are in the federal government speak, that are not subject to continuing resolutions, the start-stop thing that is just a really bad way to run IT. And so we have a centralized fund and we have agency funds that can be used to provide the funding for some of these innovation projects and some of these modernization projects. The MGT Act provides for a couple of very unique things. One is everything has to have a real business case. And that's not something that government agencies are used to thinking about.
Or good at.
Or good at. And so this will require the development of some new skills. There's also a requirement that the money that is used gets paid back to the fund, which means there has to be real cost savings or real benefit somewhere along the way. And if that doesn't happen, then the agencies are going to have to figure out a way to repay the money anyhow. And that should serve to get management attention and focus on these projects and make sure that they're well managed. In the old world, you just got an appropriation, you got handed some money and they'd say, go spend it. And then as soon as you got the money, your job was to go find the next bunch of money. Right. It wasn't always focused on implementation.
very stovepiped funding. So Congress has contributed to this problem. It's not the agencies, but Congress saying, not understanding that IT, especially infrastructure and networks, needs to be a continued refresh, not something I have to spend 2 years asking, may I have some investment dollars? So that's added to the aging of our infrastructure and our systems because the way we fund. So this is as much of an innovation. How we're funding is as important as the technology we're trying to get.
And then the second thing that's happened is there's something called the President's Management Agenda, which is really the most senior level people in each agency come together once a month and they agree on the cross-cutting activities that the whole leadership team of the federal government is going to engage in. And this year, IT initiatives and modernizing government systems were the top items, first things mentioned in the President's management agenda. And so
first time.
I think that's a really good sign, and I think it underscores the seriousness of the problem actually. So it was great to see that kind of focus on this issue.
How do you think the development of 5G is going to impact government IT modernization?
Well, I think it's going to impact everybody, government and non-government. Hopefully it's not going to make the gulf or the gap between what goes on in the private sector and what goes on in the government arena even bigger than it is today. But I think the promise of 5G is to bring machine learning and AI and powerful user interfaces that aren't keyboard or text oriented to mobile devices, number one. And I think number two, it can have profound effects on our experiences in the workplace. I don't know about you, but everywhere I go, people have their heads buried in their screens and they're thumbing away on whatever it happens to be. And I think 5G, along with voice and other sensors that'll be in mobile devices, will enable us to actually free ourselves from the face in the screen sort of world and let our devices really be an assistant to us and enhance our experience instead of kind of getting in the way that they do today.
Do you think that industry, business in the U.S. is going to be impacted by government IT modernization?
I think it'll have to be. There's so many areas today where even though we've had productivity gains like crazy because of technology, PCs, better compute, all of that sort of stuff, today there's a real arms race in terms of what's fact, what's fiction, what's real, what's not real. Consumer fraud, a big issue in our space. And hopefully government can work with the private sector and ensure that the right guardrails are in place so that people aren't duped by bad actors taking advantage of this same technology. So I think that's
better technology.
Or better technology. And I think this is an area where there's got to be a lot of conversation. Among other things.
And DOD and the intel community and Homeland Security are playing an important role in making sure these new technologies, new devices, that we're doing the right inspection, that we have the right risk management techniques, that we're looking at supply chains. Where was this made? What is in this device? In fact, we've been helping spearhead an effort to enhance risk management. There's a standard out of NIST around risk management, but it doesn't look at all the things that are high risk. It does not yet look at the full supply chain issues, does not look at how do I assess COTS, commercial off the shelf. So we don't have access in government to code of commercial items often. It's protected, obviously, because people want to protect their IP. So we need better ways of understanding the risk, the vitality, the interoperability of those things so that we are making better decisions, especially in government, where government really has a higher level of protection interest because of obviously national security interests and other things.
I find it interesting today that a lot of the focus on supply chain risk is on hardware, on physical components. And I think the reality is, at least from my perspective, we ought to be worried a lot more about software
Yes.
and a lot less about hardware.
Correct.
But you know, I think that's a maturing that will have to take place over the next couple of years.
Unfortunately, the hard way.
Yeah,
in some cases.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's already happened.
So, what are the challenges ahead for government modernization, IT modernization? I mean, there's this is a long road. This is not just it happens and then it's over. So, are there challenges legislatively? How do we get to a better IT in the government?
I think there's three big pillars in my mind. The first one, and the one that's probably the hardest to address, can't be done by rule or regulation, is talent.
Yes.
There was a report that just came out from OPM that said there's more people in the federal government in the 50 to 60-year-old age range than there are in the 20 to 30 or 30 to 40 range in the federal government. And it's not that those are bad people, but what's going to happen is, obviously, they're going to retire in the next few years. And if you look at the curve, there just aren't the quantities of people to replace the folks that are there today and who are the ones who happen to know how all this old stuff actually works. Right. So that's an immediate crisis that just gets worse every single day. So I think there's a sense of urgency that we've got to have around taking advantage of that knowledge base while it's still here to some degree and quickly get to replacing. So that I would call is number one. Number two is funding, and we just talked about the mechanism for that, but we're going to have to get really serious about putting the money in place to upgrade and modernize the systems.
Maybe if I can add to that, the amount that they're providing for all the civilian agencies to share, DoD has a separate effort going forward, but it's only $100 million. DoD goes out and buys a single cloud for a single agency, and they're going to spend $1 billion on one project. So you look at the dwarf, how much the civilian agencies are having to share versus DoD. The magnitude of funding for DoD it dwarfs what the agencies can get to. So having best practices shared and lessons learned from those that DoD might be able to go faster and learn a lot more and provide some enabling mechanisms that the civilian agencies can learn from or tap into as a shared service. So we're hoping that the closed community, I'm not DoD, I'm not civilian, and then the intel community is also separate. If we can get those organizations to collaborate more, because we're one government.
Right, who needs to work together.
Yeah, it's not doing so good.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tony, I'm sorry.
No, it's great. And the third area is just process change. So as John mentioned, we have a series of well-practiced, well-worn, well-understood procurement processes that are just simply out of date with the needs of modern times. And so it needs to be far more agile, it needs to be far more open, and far faster in terms of acquiring both the technology and the services that are going to be needed to make this work in the long run. And these are fairly daunting challenges, I'll add. So I think it's going to take all of us working together to make sure it happens.
And Congress understands some of those challenges. They have I think Congress has been more savvy about these issues. Will Hurd is a standout, Darrell Issa, Senator Langford, and others.
Jerry Connolly.
There is an acute awareness that they have to play a role in this transformation. It's not just the agencies. So they can help by changing the funding model a bit. They can incentivize doing the right thing. Many in government, in the procurement world, if you make one mistake, you're called out to the carpet. Even though you were doing the right thing, you skipped one little step. So it's created they say risk averse. It's more than that. It's decision averse. I don't want to make that decision. So you have 20 chefs in the kitchens and no one's willing to decide what is the final ingredient. and it's a problem. So we need to encourage risk taking. We need to encourage making faster decisions and taking ownership of those decisions and rewarding risk taking and being able to fail small. So this whole idea of incremental procurements, not big bang, but how can I update, modernize in small increments, removes a lot of risk, which means people will be less worried about the decision about a $100 billion procurement. They're going to be, oh my God, let's make sure I follow every possible rule that I can find, because I don't want to be held accountable because this will fail. Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I certainly appreciate both of you being with us today. It's been some great information.
Thank you very much,
Thanks
Clarence.
for having us. Appreciate it.
And also thank you for watching, and we'd like to hear from you, so reach out to us on Facebook or Twitter, and of course you can see more videos at tianow.org and on our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.